What what happened at the coolest event of your life?
So I would go with my son to the high school basketball playoffs in Austin. We did this 5 or 6 years. I'm my oldest son, and we started going with another dad and their son. And all you do is you do three things: you watch basketball, you eat, and you sleep. And then you get up the next day. Do that on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Saturday's all state championship games. So it's a really fun thing. You get to see amazing things that happen. But one of the lunches, we went to Earl Campbell's barbecue in Austin. And we had ordered, we were getting ready to have our lunch. And my son, I think he had ordered some fries with his barbecue. He picked up the ketchup bottle, and you got to get it going. He shook it, but the lid was not very well attached. And when he shook it, ketchup went all over the front of my shirt. And he looked at me as if he might die at that moment, like I was going to wring his neck or something. And so uh, then we just all burst out laughing. But it was Saturday. We'd already packed up. We'd already left the hotel. We were going back for the afternoon session for 4A and 5A game. And I had we wiped it off, but I had a mat of ketchup
Mm-hmm.
on me the rest of the day, as well as the the perfume of it. But just his face, as if I would kill him.
I'm speaking with Tim Henderson, who was my youth minister in high school and a little bit before that. I'll tell some of that story. But a lot of people have youth ministers. I don't think everyone considers their youth minister a lifelong spiritual father, and so this is a very personal feeling podcast episode to me. As I was thinking about it, I was, reflecting on what are we going to talk about and how do we approach this. And sometimes I'm talking to guests that are like professional peers, and sometimes I'm talking to my daughter, and sometimes I'm talking to somebody that's more of a
Mhm.
friend, colleague. And this one that just feels so packed with history. And I thought, this is going to be tough for me to sort out because what's so meaningful to me may be utterly uninteresting to other people in terms of the
Yeah,
personal stuff there. But there is okay, but here's the but. You started telling me a story, and I went ahead and hit record
yeah,
because I knew this is at the heart of the thing for me is these moments, these stories that you relish telling, um, and
yes,
and that is kind of the gist of what this is going to end up being. I think this episode that we just there's a big part of our story that we share, and that actually narrating that and seeing that in a kind of way is really theological work for me.
yeah.
It there's so much meaning even in those small moments that you might look at and go, wow, okay, you spilled ketchup on yourself, but no, hold on.
Mhm.
Let's let's think about what this means and why it means something. And
Yeah.
um, but maybe you don't think about it quite that way. I don't know. You love telling stories, and you're very gifted at telling stories, using stories in ministry and in
Yes.
in formation. And how do you think about that? Why is that just reflexive for you? Did you grow up in a storytelling family, or did you learn it along the way?
It just became natural to me along the way. It made sense to me to maybe use particularly real life stories, things that had
Hmm.
happened to me. And maybe why it pushed it a little bit, the very first church I worked at, I was required to do a bulletin article,
Mm.
which a lot of times was mainly about what's going on, right? What's coming up as a youth minister, so people are informed. This was pre-internet, so written weekly mailed bulletin was one of the most effective communication forms at the time. Not that it was very good, but I didn't have a lot to do, a lot to say in the beginning. I came into a situation that we were kind of rebuilding from the ground up, and um, I had some space, and so I just started writing things. I had little kids; they would do stuff, and I started getting feedback from people who weren't necessarily connected to the youth ministry. Older folks, there were a lot of older folks in this church, and one I was on the back.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit amazing. They turned it over and read it, uh, and then they were kind enough to give feedback, and it
Right,
was
right.
the feedback was keep doing that. We like it. So I did, and I think that I probably would have told stories anyway, but that kind of
Uh-huh.
fueled it a little bit. So
Yeah.
just the amazing impact sometimes of little feedback. We can't forget that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I don't know. There are various people in one's life who are storytellers, but you're one of the ones for me that I have. It's weird. I don't have memories of the stories. I have memories of you telling stories, right? Of being in those situations where it's like we're just like there's a group of people hanging out, and that happened in a variety of contexts that some of which I think I'll end up referring to in the course of the episode. But it's like, what do we do with our time here? Or what does a conversation look like? And for me, the way I'm wired, a conversation so often is ideas. I want to hash something out, debate something or whatever. But those moments in my life where you're in the frame and we're just hanging out, people are telling stories
Mm.
and laughing and reflecting on those stories, and it's just there's these two different modes that I find so interesting because I'm really bad at telling stories. I mean, it's like there's some part of my brain that just doesn't go there easily or something,
Mm.
and that's why I can't remember jokes. I love jokes. I love comedy, but I can't. I genuinely, when I try to remember a joke that made me laugh hard, I'll be like, I don't remember. I don't remember the joke. so so anyway,
Mm.
the storytelling part of that has just it's like a cherished memory
Mm.
of and whenever we get to reconnect, now that I'm an adult too, and life is so busy, and we live in different states now, and all of that. It's occasional, but when we get to reconnect, you're always telling stories and making me laugh.
Well, and I'm no longer a youth minister, but I'm a preaching minister
Yeah,
at a small church, and I find what I hear most back is when I do tell a story or refer to something uh, that's not biblical text. That
yeah,
just seems to connect uh, with people. Not that they don't ever talk about the text, but for instance, this last week I referenced Bill Withers. He's a singer, songs that people might recognize, like "Lean on Me."
oh yeah,
Yeah, and there's another one he referenced was "Ain't No Sunshine." That was his first big hit.
mm-hmm.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. And so I use that to illustrate if they're not talking about God, they're talking about leaning on each other, or he's talking about a relationship that's not where his partner may not be real faithful because she goes a lot,
Hmm.
but he realized there's some light, there's something there in that relationship. Uh, if we can figure that out about each other, how much more should it
Yeah.
be true of God? You know,
Yeah.
because in that song, you know, Sunshine, it's the hook. I know, I know, I know, I know. He repeats it
Hmm.
26 times, and uh, that's pretty convincing to me. It's stuck, right?
Yeah.
But I had numerous people reference me talking about that,
Hmm.
and you know, just it just lands different
Yeah.
than when we're more technical. Maybe I don't know the right way to say
No,
that.
it does. I mean, no, it's and okay. So it's to my great frustration that I'm not good with stories. But on the one hand, on the other hand, I've always had a little bit of disdain for the preacher story
Yes.
because early in life I figured out. I mean, just listening to sermons early in life, I figured out like you're telling a story that's not your story.
Hmm.
There's some disingenuousness where you present it as a thing that happened to you or whatever, or and it's like you do that because there's this recognition that stories connect, that that's how you improve a sermon is
Hmm.
have a sermon with or have a story for each point or a main story or a narrative style sermon or whatever, and some of that was just really off-putting to me. It sets off the BS radar, and
Yeah.
I just get that it's like
Yeah.
I don't that story doesn't work for me. But what's different about what we're talking about is this is just how you operate in life. I mean,
Yes.
just in the course of a day that I would hang out with you and we would be doing whatever, you would be telling stories to kind of connect to what we were doing or what had just happened. And
Hmm.
it's like this narrative web. But there's also the gift that you have of I don't hate all stories and sermons. That's not my point. I'm saying the preacher sermon, and air quotes, is seeing where there is real relevance in a story from your own life
Hmm.
and how it does actually connect to something about God that you're sharing in teaching or sermonic form, right? And to actually be able to see those connections is the thing. And you have this intuitive, so it'll be like we're talking about a topic and it will set off a story for you and you'll just start sharing. He's like, I have my story Rolodex in my brain, and this is the one that goes with this, and it's like that's so cool.
I was going to say a challenge to that is when you're at a place for very long is uh, not having the same story queued up every time.
Right, of course, of course. Well, I've been around you long enough to have heard some stories more than once.
Sure. Yeah.
Of course, but that's also part of the familial dynamic of long-term ministry, isn't it? Like
Right.
the other place where that I sort of got carried into that's a very storied world is my wife's family when I
Mm.
married in.
Yeah.
And this I didn't know because my family's a different kind of thing, and so I didn't have the experience of being in a family dynamic, which I've now learned is relatively common, where particularly if there are multiple generations of a stable family, there are stories that get shared every year when they're together. Everybody, you tell the same stories over and over, and you laugh at the same things that happened over and over, and it's just like this rhythm of kind of narrative
Hmm.
reconnecting that the family does. And so I've learned like actually what Tim does when he repeats a story that I've heard before, but there's somebody else in the mix, and is he's kind of inducting them into the family world of this is our family story, and that these are the ones that get repeated, and the ideas that shape us. I don't know. That's how I think about it. That's my
Well,
experience.
and to that point, I was youth minister at a church for over 20 years.
Uh-huh.
And so, what I also learned to bring people into was there were generations that went through the youth group and they were
Yeah.
disconnected, right? For me, it was all just one continuous thing,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, I'd have to remember, oh, this generation didn't watch The Princess Bride. I can't
Oh,
reference that. It's hard to imagine, but uh, I'd say a name like that
Humperdinck.
you would think everybody would know, and they're looking at me with a blank stare, and they go, "Oh, they don't know who Mark Essery is,
Uh-huh.
right?" Because he was gone when they
Yeah.
arrived,
Yeah, yeah.
and but then I could tell those stories, and so my hope was their experience of even the church of the youth group
Mm-hmm.
was more extended than just their short time.
Yeah.
And then where people went after they left to tell that story as well.
Yeah.
Because the hope's always that people imagine, well, I could do that too. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
somebody right here in this place did that or is doing it now. Well, maybe I could.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's part of that family history. And isn't that, I mean, the stories from especially the Old Testament, wasn't that part of their purpose?
Mm.
To bring
Yeah.
the newer generations into, uh, you think about some of the text. There's a psalm I really like. It talks about one generation tells the next generation, and so
Mm-hmm.
um, that's I think that's an important element.
That's making me want to just go directly down the path of your sort of philosophy of ministry and what what shaped those 20 years and so on. But I think we need to lead into that with a little more sort of your biography, kind of how you came into ministry, why youth ministry, and that sort of thing. And then I want to connect that with when our relation starts in 1995, the summer of 1995. But so how did you decide to go into ministry and why youth ministry to begin with? Take us back to ye old 70s.
Well, I think a big part. My mom had a big influence. Not that I had to do that, but it, I don't know. She just nurtured that in
Mm-hmm.
me. I think I have interpersonal people skills, good
Mm-hmm.
soft skills, and so I don't know if she saw that or whether it's uh, an idea that if we had a minister come out of the family somehow, that's an affirmation of the
Yeah.
work of the family.
Yeah.
Um, Probably a mixture of
Mm-hmm.
both of those things, but I connected at church at an early age. People saw potential, nurtured that in me, and you know, I don't remember making the decision. It just seemed the natural thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I headed off to college and pursued that.
Went to Abilene Christian College.
Well, it was university,
Was
but
it university by the time you went? I
it
didn't
was.
know when the shift happened. I get it happened later for Harding. It was
Yeah,
Harding College for a long time.
yeah. It already happened. Not a long time. I went in '78,
Yeah.
so it had already taken place.
Okay.
And then because we were always ACU instead of ACC,
Yeah.
uh, did undergraduate, and then I actually stayed and did a master's program in marriage and family therapy. Uh,
So what prompted? I mean, how did you connect at that time youth ministry and marriage and family therapy as a, let's just say back then there weren't a lot of people going into youth ministry that did a master's degree first.
right.
And yeah,
I think part of it was it wasn't necessarily just going to be a youth minister. I was
okay,
going to be a minister,
yeah,
right? And I don't know if there was a youth ministry major. There probably might have been some kind of ministry major I could have done, but I did biblical text
yeah.
as my undergraduate.
Church of Christ boy, that's what you
Yeah,
do.
exactly. Uh, and so it wasn't looking at youth ministry necessarily that, I'll do that for 5 years and then I'll move, but it was the easiest on ramp.
Hmm.
And I think that inhabited it, my thinking. But also I was drawn to, there's a, there's a creative license that you get as a youth ministry that I find refreshing. Um,
Yeah.
because I don't like doing things just because we've always done it.
Uh huh.
And it's not like it's bad or wrong, but is there another way to approach that? And I learned pretty early on that there's a bigger tolerance of that and maybe even expectation in youth ministry. And so they just fit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's how I got started. The reason I did marriage and family was uh, it was another tool.
Hmm.
Is the way I originally started looking at it. I didn't understand going in how much it would change my whole outlook of ministry. Uh, if you're not familiar with marriage and family therapy part, at least when I was trained, a big part of it was the idea of systems.
Family systems. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that really ignited something in me, a different way of. It just made so much sense, and then you can begin to see the church in the same way. And
Yep.
so I learned a lot about dynamics
Hmm.
and the things that were going on behind the scene, and that just fit.
Hmm.
So I remember when I was doing my oral defense of my master's. It was an interesting setup because there were people that I'd never even had for class that were part of that. It's just the way the thing was set up at the time. Um, but one of my professors that I had taken a lot of work under and been a mentor asked a question about something I had done. He said, "Is that first or second order change?" If you're not familiar with that idea, of first order is just kind of superficial,
Hmm.
right? It's different, but it doesn't change anything,
Hmm.
right? And it's like I have a black shirt on. If I put a green one on, you'd say I'd changed shirts, but basically, I'm still doing the same thing. Green or black doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Second order change is where you fundamentally change how something works. And my response to the question was, it's both.
Mm.
And he just got a little uh, sly grin on his face and sat back and relaxed.
Mm.
That's all he needed to know. Did I did I see through? Am I
Yeah.
only going to work for superficial, or do I understand the
Yeah.
dynamic going on there?
Yeah.
And that's what graduate school did for me. I did some therapy. I had someone who I mentored under, but that was brief. So
Hmm.
most of my career, I haven't, uh, on one level, used that degree
Yeah.
because
No, you
I'm not getting paid to do that, but I
on
use it every
on
day.
a first order level, you didn't use it. On a second order level, you
Yeah,
definitely used it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
constantly, because I cannot
Constantly.
not think that way.
No, you are a systems thinker,
Yeah.
and that may be not. I've not thought about this before, Tim, but that may be part of our connection as well, because I think systemically,
Hmm.
just intuitively. That's how I think, and so over the years, our many long conversations have often actually just been about that deeper level change
Right.
perspective, and
Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, do I remember correctly that You were connected in some way with one of either Armour or Browning of system sensitive leadership.
Yeah, I did a lot of reading in that area.
Uh huh.
Yeah, I wasn't directly connected. In fact, my first experience with that was the guy who developed it, Graves.
Okay, that's what I was. I knew you were. Yeah, there was some
Right.
connection with the development of of the system sensitive leadership idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It was after, so many years after I finished school, because I didn't encounter it until the second church I worked at. Worked at the first one,
Mm.
7 years. So, it's 8 or 9 years after I'd been out of school.
Hmm.
I encountered through a missionary who was in residence at the church I was working at, and so we started having discussions about it, and then I started reading about Graves. And then after that, Armour and Browning wrote their book, and I've used it in a couple of settings
Hmm.
uh, to
Well,
try to give language to talk about some things that were going on. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it was an interesting kind of circle back kind of moment when that book was assigned in spiritual leadership or church leadership. I don't remember what the class was called. This was undergrad, so it's too long ago to remember. But Randy Willingham's class, he had us reading Armour and Browning, and for listeners, if you haven't listened to my episode with Randy, go back and listen to that one. But then we end up talking, and I realized that you're like deeply familiar with system sensitive leadership, and in fact, and that's why that conversation just stuck in my head because I was like, well, this is really weird because I'm loving this book and the way that it's kind of breaking down and giving you again language models for understanding more deeply what's going on in a system like a church or a family,
Hmm.
and so that was one of my first experiences of my higher education actually paying off where the conversation between you and me changed because now I had language to talk with you about something that I before then I couldn't have really
Right.
engaged in that conversation, and so
Right.
that was a joyful moment for me. I remember really being glad that
Yeah, and that was the hope in sharing it in a church context that
yeah.
the church could embrace that language rather than uh, like we do with so many things. You're either on one side or the other. There's not a side, but there are differences that we have to recognize,
Yeah.
and it helps to give you kind language to engage with people who might think very differently.
Yeah, strangely the same function that the Enneagram craze of
Hmm.
5 or 6 years ago was really about.
Hmm.
It's interesting how this sort of cycles around, and people like, it's a generational thing again, right? But a
Hmm.
generation of people kind of discover there's a model for thinking about why I dislike or struggle with or click perfectly with, and then these different subsets of my community, and it's a model. I don't know. It's like it one way or another. It's just a way of kind of saying people operate differently. Here's some ways of thinking how that's actually going, and why you don't have to attribute certain motives to them.
Right.
And in and that like changes the dynamic. Everybody's like, oh, I feel so much better that now I have a way to talk about this, which
And
somewhat flabbergasts me, Tim. It's like how anyway, yeah.
then we take it too far and try to make it explain everything, and it falls apart.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
But it is useful language.
It
Uh,
really is. It really is effective. It does something to have a model like that to apply. What I was gonna say is it flabbergasts me often that like that's the discovery. Like that's the total of the discovery is like this this really changed my marriage because I realized that my husband is assuming X, Y, and Z, and I was assuming A, B, and C, and that's just how he is. And now I know that, so I'm not mad anymore. And I'm like, how did you not already know? We got some different assumptions going on here. I don't know, but it really is. I mean, that's just the nature of relationships. They're so intense often, and they're so complicated that you kind of need a way to step back and look through a different lens.
Well, and the problem is not the assumptions;
Yeah.
it's the pre-assumptions.
Uh huh.
The ones where that are just that's the way the world works, that we don't even think about them or
Yeah.
question them
Yep.
until we run into somebody that causes us to do that.
Yeah.
And then the real question is, will I look at myself to determine what's brought me to this point, and will I question? Is it okay to question my things I'm pre-assuming?
Yeah. Yeah. It breaks you. It's one of the ways of breaking yourself loose.
Yeah.
It being learning a model such as this, breaking yourself loose from default egocentrism. That my way of seeing things is obviously the way everybody sees things. Like my worldview is just the worldview, and so when people are acting in ways that don't align with that, it's confusing to me because I assume everybody sees everything the same way I do. And so you break loose from that and realize, actually, my way of seeing things is one way of seeing things. And
And sometimes people can share a similar thinking,
Mhm.
but apply it differently, and that's where the train wreck is.
yeah, yeah,
They're already working from the same basic thought pattern, but based on other things, their application of that's just different.
yeah. No fight's worse than siblings, right? I mean,
Right?
that's why in the history of the Restoration movement, it's the denominations that are most like us that we've been most vehemently uh, uh, upset about. I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like that. Baptists are our churches of Christ, like first cousins, historically speaking. You know what I mean? It's like we're
Yeah.
the same. It's the same family system and a whole bunch of the same assumptions, but it leads in different directions, and those divergences just drive us bananas.
Well, because when Jesus was asked, uh, you know, what's the most important law?
Yeah,
He said, stupid, they're all the same. Come on.
every jot and tittle is of equal value, obviously.
They aren't. There's no laws. Oh, wait. Yeah. Well, there's a couple.
There's a cup. Okay, maybe there's some priorities. Oh boy.
And we're so 100% or nothing
Yeah,
that,
all or nothing.
yeah. We use the word grace, but
Okay, so that brings us back to you're you're going into ministry. You got that degree in your hand. Going into youth ministry, you're at a church for 7 years first.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, seven.
there's a moment before then.
Okay.
Um, the way I went to college was in my sophomore year, I began working for UPS. I loaded package cars for going out for delivery in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and I did that through graduate school. It was an incredible thing. I could pay for college. I came out with just the minimum student loan debt. I got
Mm-hmm.
married. I started having kids, and all the time I'm going to school and working.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an incredible thing. But I graduated, master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was the interesting dynamic. I had no, in most people's mind, no practical experience.
Right.
Okay. I have master's level education in uh, marriage and family therapy. So when I applied for youth ministry jobs, they thought you're just using this as a stepping stone. We want you here longer. And so I didn't get those interviews. And then if it was a family ministry job,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the people applying for those had practical experience and oftentimes at least a master's degree, if not a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't getting those interviews. And I was done with working at UPS and getting up at 3:30 in the morning
Yeah.
and going to work. I mean, it was okay when it was accomplishing my goal,
Yeah.
but it was no longer doing that. And I asked them, it was coming towards peak season. I said, I want to be a driver. I don't want to work 4 hours a day when I'm not going to school. And I had by that time become a supervisor of the sort and load.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, you're really more valuable to us
Don't be so good at what you do.
in your current position. And so I just made the very thought out and reasoned response. So I quit.
Uh-huh.
And I moved to Dallas for a full time job that was paying half as much as what my part time job was paying.
Uh,
So you see that none of this is adding up. But it was, I my wife and I talked about this the other day. Well, how would our life be different if they said, yes, come drive, and I got used to that steady income and paying off my student loan,
yeah.
and I'm still living in Abilene all these years later, driving a truck for UPS. I'm the old guy that has the route going to Haskell, right? Um, but we moved to Dallas. I went to work, and there's just great irony in so many things in life. I went to work for Federal Express after working at UPS, so that was hard for them to swallow. And after just a few months, we started going to a church in the area, and their youth minister quit after I spent uh, I don't know, by that time probably a year looking for a job, and they they talked to me on a Wednesday and hired me on Sunday.
Mm.
They hadn't talked to anybody else. I was right there. I was already teaching like Wednesday night class,
Mm-hmm.
and um, it just kind of fell in my lap.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't made that decision to move there and be there, that wouldn't have happened. So um, you can say that happened any way you like.
Mm. Providentially
Yes, or otherwise.
or otherwise.
It's how it unfolded. It's
It
the
did happen.
story. Yeah, it did happen.
So
And so
7 years.
7 years at that church, and then we moved to the next church, and we're there 22 years, and that's where we
Yeah.
encountered each other.
Yeah. Okay. So here's one of the things that I want to unpack. I want to figure out because I don't think I've never actually asked you this directly. So for me, I grow up in a bunch of different places. We move around a lot,
Hmm.
but mostly we're plugging into pretty small, pretty rural churches of Christ, right?
Hmm.
And for those listeners who don't know what that means, here's the abbreviated portrayal of that. These are very sincere, very devoted, very hard nosed, very black and white, very prone to a kind of legalism, very exclusivistic in terms of every other flavor of Christianity, being inadequate, and very Bible centric. If you're going to say anything about them, they are Bible centric. And there's a lot more to say just about the whole tradition of the Restoration movement and where all that comes from and what are the positives and the negatives and all that. But where I grew up, in those kind of rural Texas, Oklahoma, for the most part, congregations, I'm like my native world is that very rough and judgy and demanding kind of church existence. That's what I know. However, that informs the way my family life goes. My family life goes the way of divorce and living with a single mom, and my sister being quite a bit older than me. She graduates high school and goes off to college, and I'm effectively an only child in a single parent household. And we come to the point in our lives where my mom needs to move for a better job and thinks that one of her older kids is going to be in the Tyler area, so she starts job hunting in the Tyler area. We move there. That older child never ends up moving. So we're just, for no reason, we're now in a suburb of Tyler, Texas. We're in White House,
Yeah.
and begin the process of looking for a church. Something that my mom is, it's not that she was prioritizing this over like a youth group, but here's the thing: we had never been somewhere that had a youth group.
Right.
And so it wasn't even a paradigm for her to think about. I need to be thinking, what is it? What's the youth group like? And that's the thing to make sure Gregory gets plugged into, and and so one of the things that she's actually looking for is she's realized some churches actually have like singles ministry or divorcee ministries. Like churches are large enough to have enough people for those kinds of things to be viable. So she's actually really excited and starts looking at churches around Tyler, and there is a singles ministry at Shiloh Road that's pretty robust, and that's why we initially start coming to Shiloh.
Mhm.
Discover actually that there's an even more robust youth group, and lots happening there that I immediately feel connected with, and but here's to tell all that story. Here's what I was driving at. This is the point in my life. This is the summer before my 8th grade year where I encounter a theology of grace that is not only informing the ministry that's happening there, but I think quite consciously reforming the the native Church of Christ culture in Texas. And I've never asked you the question, where did that come from? Because you were raised in churches of Christ as well. What planted the seeds of a grace centered theology and ministry?
There's not a moment
Okay.
necessarily that I can track back to other than willingness to read the text and read the life of Jesus and say, isn't that what he's saying?
Yeah.
And believing that, and let's live that out,
Yeah.
right? Let's don't do all this level one stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Show up at church, check. Wednesday night too, double check.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Whew, that wears me out.
Yeah.
But to turn the other cheek, go the extra mile, love your enemy,
Mm.
you go, okay, that's a challenge. How do I get there?
Yeah.
And I think it just comes from the commitment to live that out
Mm.
imperfectly, but still as the goal. Uh,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. That's interesting. It makes me wonder on the one hand what the influences in our church lives often kind of create the canon within the canon for us. And classically in the Restoration movement, that's been Paul more than anything. And part of the corrective to that, as many others have said, beyond our little circle, is returning to the Gospels. And
Mhm.
like as you said, being willing to stay in the Gospels and let that reshape the way you read everything else. I suppose I inherited that tendency from you. That's how I have come to operate in many ways in my own thinking about Scripture. And
Or
but
I would say it's that you also encountered the same spirit that I did,
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah,
and that's how you respond to it, right? Um,
yeah, yeah,
and hopefully that's easier when you see it lived out to connect with that. Um,
right. So no major moment, no major influence. As you know, as I tell the story, you were that influence. I mean, there is a moment in my life where the contrast is very stark. It's very clear. I've entered into this space where this is different. I've never really been taught this way before, and and as you know, but let me say for listeners, that sets me on a course for the rest of my life. Okay, and I haven't actually taken the time on the podcast to talk about this. Where I normally tell this story is in discipleship groups, in to some extent in classrooms, or especially when I'm talking with students that are in vocational discernment, and it's like, what's the story of how you got there? How do you make these kinds of choices? How does this happen, right? And it's a strange thing to say when people ask, well, why did you go into the mission field? Why that path? How did you get there? And my answer is honestly, and I'm not blowing smoke. I'm not. I feel no need to flatter you, but this is the truth. I experienced a possibility
mhm,
that I couldn't not share.
mhm,
That's what it is. I tasted a community life. I glimpsed something and realized that this is a possibility that there's just no way I can choose not to make it my business
right.
to let other people know about this possibility,
Mm.
this thing. And it is, of course, a community marked by grace, right?
Mhm.
It is a grace filled community, but it's that, and it was, and so when I explain to people, I'm talking about my youth group experience. I decided to go into foreign mission work as as a junior in high school because that experience was so fundamentally compelling to me. It was, and it was by and large in contrast to the rest of my experience of even that church.
Mhm.
Right? It's a sweet family, and there are lots of things I love and appreciate about growing up those years there. Other things I might say as well, but for me, it always felt like the youth group was a subversive community within the community. That something else was happening there that actually began spilling out through the parents of the
Mhm.
kids and youth group into the church in ways beyond just your being on staff and being in conversations about the church as a whole and things like that, but actual culture change and perspective shift and value shift and things like that. I'm seeing that happen as a high schooler, again, intuitively, systems, not even having the language for it, but just being able to look at this and go like, okay, this I get this, and this is what I want to do. I want to subvert people's reality with grace,
Mhm.
and 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 so that's what launched me on the path that I'm still on, which is taking, academic turns and all of that kind of stuff. But to me, it's all one fabric. It's all woven into one thing that is sparked by this moment of encountering grace in a community of Christians who are trying to figure it out together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I didn't actually ask you a question. Well,
Well,
I don't know. How did you think about what you were doing in that youth ministry? Did you have a philosophy of ministry, or did you have I don't know. How did you think about the way the youth group and the rest of the church sort of contrasted and compared and all of that?
I guess I would say that, I, as you noted, I've grown up in the church. I speak Church of Christ,
Sure.
and I know uh, I can predict what the reactions are going to be to various things,
Yeah.
and uh, the ones I find unacceptable, I don't necessarily use as a barrier to, the to not do what I feel compelled to do.
Yeah.
So philosophy of ministry, uh, the Spirit of God is alive and He works and He transforms people.
Mm-hmm.
And I viewed my role as to create opportunities for God to work in ways that He may not be given that opportunity.
Yeah.
That sounds too pretentious, but the idea is to that's my job, to create intersections, and taking people out of what they know sometimes creates that.
Yeah.
And so you do things that are going to allow people to encounter God in a way that transforms them, and I just get to watch.
Yeah.
Well, that was my philosophy. I wonder what's going to happen in these scenarios.
Yep.
So part, and there's some definite things I would think about. I had a philosophy that said there are three kinds of learning. There's formal learning,
Mm-hmm.
and it has its place. If I'm building a rocket ship, there's some steps and science and things I need to know, and I can even follow a recipe and construct this. Formal learning, I need to know how to do math and read, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a place for all of that. And then there's a part that I always was drawn to, and that's informal learning.
Mm-hmm.
Informal learning, you control the what and the when, right?
Mm-hmm.
Math is at 8 a.m. Tuesday, Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the informal, you didn't control the when. Something popped up, and you use that moment. That's where the storytelling or seeing it in the moment happened. But I ran across another idea called uh, uh, non-formal learning.
Yeah.
That's where you didn't control the what or the when,
Mm-hmm.
but you design things. Maybe I didn't say that right. You design something that something could happen, and you just see what it is. So,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, I would take kids to the mountains because putting them under those conditions and working together for a common goal, what would people learn? So I don't know what they're going to learn, but I can recognize it when I see it unfolding.
Yeah, that's right.
And,
Teachable
I
moments.
I could tell a bunch of stories. I struggled. You can probably say I'm a big guy. Hiking, when you look at me, is not what you think. And I struggled getting to high camp, going to summit. And there was one time I was behind, and this man who was on the trip, because see, it's not just about the kids, as you noted. He came back to help me. And all he did to help me was say, okay, follow my pace, step where I step.
Mm-hmm.
So we do that, and we get to high camp. And that night, I share how that's what an elder does,
Yeah.
right? And I look at over him, And there are tears
Yeah.
streaming in his eyes because he says, I was sitting here saying, somebody should go help them. Somebody, who's going to go help them? And then he thought, I'm an elder. If I don't go, who's going to go?
Yeah.
If I don't act, why would I expect someone else to act?
Yeah.
And so for me to see that, and then for everybody who was there to hear that, it's not a made up story. It's not to make a point. It's what happened.
Yeah.
And those are the moments that you just go, God brought something together here that is you can't orchestrate.
Yeah.
But my small part is to provide an opportunity for things like that to happen.
Yeah.
And I think over time too, I just got really happy for the smallest things happening.
That's it. Yes.
I get past this idea we're doing some big thing and just celebrate the very smallest thing. One of my favorite stories I often retell is I would take kids to Six Flags. Can anything good come of that? Well, sure.
One might say no.
People do have enjoyment,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we were signing up, and one of the girls in the youth group came and said, I want to pay for this other girl to go because I don't think she has the money. Paying with her own money. And I thought, well, that's nice. She wants her friend to hang out with. And then I looked at the list, and she wasn't signed up. So I had to know, right? You're paying for this girl to go, and you're not even going? So he said, yeah, I hate Six Flags, but she doesn't. So, it's that moment you start hearing they're getting a glimpse of this community. It's not just
Yeah.
what am I getting? What's the transaction that benefits me? And they're giving freely, and that's a tiny thing. Nobody else that would happen. Maybe they don't notice, but for some reason I notice those things, and that's what inspires me.
Yep.
Just the very smallest thing happening. Or times where you set something up. We used to do a big event, and kids would go and have chorus and puppets and drama, all kinds of things, speech. And as people got older, a couple of things happened in the youth group. The older kids ran the younger kids, even the third, fourth, and fifth graders ran their events. We built that tradition, so most of the time, all of the younger kids were being mentored by high schoolers. No adults involved with them a lot of times. And the high school teams, I let them decide what they were going to do, and there was a rule in drama that you can't plug anything in. So the reason for that is we were at these big hotels, and you can't guarantee a electrical source. So if you're going to need something, make sure you are prepared not to plug it in. You can use electronics, but don't count on the room.
Yeah. Won't be an extension cord necessarily.
Yeah. And so the night before they were to perform the next morning, the later head high school girl came to me and said, we read the rules, and it said you can't plug in. This was at the hotel. Okay. They said, well, it says we can't, and we have to because our whole drama is a pantomime set to music.
Yeah.
We can't do it without it. I said, well, what are you going to do?
That's such a good question.
I'm like, I don't have to solve this. This is yours,
Yeah.
right? I'm kind of excited to see what you do. And they said, well, we went downstairs to the gift shop, and we found one of the adults who has a battery operated, what do they call
Boombox
it?
kind of
Boom
thing.
box,
Yeah.
dim box, whatever it was. But it takes 8C batteries,
Yeah.
and the gift shop had 4. I said, "Oh no! What are you going to do?" And they said, "We don't know." And I said, "Well, let's see what happens." Well, they did go into the room. They did plug in,
Hmm.
right, which was against the rules. There happened to be one right there. They did a great job. And the very first judge giving them feedback says, the rules say you can't plug in.
Hmm.
So I look back later and say, um, how'd it go? What did you learn, from this experience? And they said, it's important to read the rules before you get to the hotel.
This is a good.
Brilliant,
It's a good
brilliant
life lesson.
success, right?
Yes. Yep.
This,
Yep.
this, and some people would have prevented what they would call a failure
Yeah.
and have robbed them of that success
Hmm.
of figuring it out. And even though it was against the rules, they did what was necessary in order to do their drama and suffered the consequences of it.
Hmm.
I mean, what can be more beautiful than that?
Hmm.
And so even the little things aren't necessarily big spiritual, theological truths
Right.
that they learn. It's just about, is it okay not to get everything right?
But that is a big spiritual theological
Well, I
truth.
think
You know
so.
what I mean?
Yeah, but
No.
most people don't acknowledge that.
Well, most people don't recognize the way that those kinds of small experiences. I mean, people get distracted from
Mm.
this was supposed to be about something else, and why aren't they learning things about whatever that is? There's a theme at the event. There's that's something they're supposed to be learning about. They're supposed to be learning to do drama, and they're supposed to be learning to da 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 all of this other stuff, and you're focused on this lesson of like, is it okay if things don't go the way that we planned, right? And
Hmm.
so now it's not only is it the wrong lesson, but then people don't see how that little lesson is such a considerable contributor to the formation of that culture that I was talking about initially. That
Hmm.
now, well, what does it mean to be a culture of grace?
Hmm.
Well, how better could you say it then? This is a community where we're comfortable with things not going the way we thought they should go.
Yeah.
Right? There's a graciousness in that to ourselves, to one another, like that. So there's this small little contributions that collectively build into a different way of life, and
Yeah.
that's so deep to me. That is so profound.
So there's another way to illustrate this as well from another thing that would happen, because we get a narrow view of what it means to do church.
Hmm.
Okay. So over time, we started doing some of this training on Wednesday nights. It would uh, supplant Bible class, right? And,
Dun
and I
dun
had
dun.
I had particular individuals that questioned that.
Yeah.
It wasn't that what we were doing was evil or bad, but Bible class is Bible class,
Hmm.
right? If you're not reading verse by verse, then something's off here.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, part of what we're doing here is taking these kids and teaching them to work together as brothers and sisters in order to convey a Christian message,
Yeah.
whatever they're choosing to do. And wouldn't that be a good thing? And what would our church be like if their parents knew how to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, let's bring up this next generation that knows how to work together and work through disagreements to be a healthier church. Isn't that just as important as knowing the text?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it necessarily landed well, but I kept doing it because that was my conviction.
Yeah.
That we're doing, yes, I love the text. I want to keep teaching it, but there's so many more things that it means to be a community, and we need to develop those skills than just I can answer the Bible question.
Yeah.
I actually know how to treat people and listen to them and show respect.
Without which, as our tribe's history indicates, we can't even then read the text.
Right.
Right. I mean, the interpretation of Scripture is a communal endeavor. And
Yes.
if your community is relationally broken, that means your engagement with the Bible is inevitably broken.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, and again, this is a hermeneutical lesson that I learned before I knew the word hermeneutics from being in this kind of learning environment, from being in this discipleship relationship with you. Let me give another example. This is one that I share often with discipleship groups, or when I'm teaching about discipleship practices in some context, and that often entails teaching that entails beginning with a kind of reflection that everyone needs to do to kind of take stock of, like, have you ever actually been discipled?
Mm.
And how did that happen? Where did that happen? What did that look like? Right? Because everybody that I'm working with, which is basically has been over the last so many years, people my age and younger, all the way down to college age, they all basically go like, I don't exactly know what discipleship is. I don't know what that means. What does it mean to disciple someone or to be discipled? It's lingo that's used, but it doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know what that is. I know what going to church means. I know what going to Bible class means. I know what having my private time means. And but what are you talking about, right? And so that exercise frequently is one of most people in the group saying, "I don't think I've ever been discipled. I don't think so." Or some of them intuitively go, "I think my parents discipled me."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where, if there's anything like what I see Jesus doing with his followers, particularly the 12, I think my parents were the place where that happened, or sometimes in my youth group, that's where that happened. But for most people, especially adults, absolutely not. We don't put ourselves in those kinds of relationships with that kind of intentionality, which is part of what I'm trying to remedy when I teach or form discipleship groups. And so when it's my turn to share, I'll say I'm very similar. I think most of my church experience, you would look at it objectively and say disciple making and discipleship are not part of this. It's not what it's about, except I had this youth group experience where I can put my finger on intentionality, which is really a key word in this conversation about discipleship. There's intentionality about informal and non-formal teaching moments that is the heart of discipleship. It's not the formal teaching moments, which are helpful and important, but the informal moments, because what you're actually talking about is life together,
Yeah.
living life together, and out of that discerning, where is God at work? Where is God's Spirit doing something? How do I respond to that? Where's the joy in this? Why is this small moment important, right? So all of these things absorbing in this experience, but also you're teaching us to think like this. So here's the story. And this one I remember very clearly because it was one of those moments of self-realization where I was a senior and it was a Thursday night youth group meeting that we called Fish. And that was, usually just eating together and then praying together and singing together and then talking about some passage of scripture a little bit, you sharing something, some kind of teaching. And you tell a story that leads to a question. You say, well, so earlier this week I went to the bank and I withdrew a pretty significant sum of money, and then when I got home I realized that the cashier had given me way too much. And you asked us, what did I do? Right? And of course, the natural answer, the sort of be a good person answer is, well, you took the money back, right? That's the obvious answer. But the reason that this was one of those moments of sort of I realized something about myself, which was that I had got it. As a senior looking toward college, and I realized, okay, I got it. That I intuitively knew because of my relationship with you, the answer to the question was, you took your kid with you because you wanted them to see this is how you live. This is the way that you, and I knew that answer. And I remember your face being a little surprised because I don't think you, I don't think you were expecting anybody to make that leap, right? Because it's a fairly far leap. But I knew you, and I knew, and I just said, you took your kids, and you're like, yes, that's right. And so that was, more than being happy I got the answer right, which is
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Right.
I realized, I understand. I think I've learned the lesson. I think I got it. This is what we do. We make intentional decisions
Yeah.
to model and bring other people along for the ride.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing here. That's the whole thing. And it's a tiny moment. It's a trip back to the bank to return some cash that's not mine. And
Yeah.
on the face of it, it's no, grand ethical coup. It's like, okay, you're an honest person, right? But it's so much deeper than that. It's like, I think my child needs to see this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think my youth group needs to be taught to think like this. This is the way that they need to think about the answer to the question. It's not be a good person. It's model life together for others. And anyway,
Well,
that's a really formative moment for me, a powerful memory.
yeah. Well, and it's those small moments, right? When
Yeah.
our culture would say, "You have the right to do it this way," that
Yeah.
we decide there's a greater way. Uh, and the guys teaching our Bible class at church right now did Philemon, and part of what he was asking is when Paul sends Onesimus back to Philemon. If you're Philemon, he did a really good job of explaining the consequences and the culture around escaped slaves and how Rome was brutal in order to squash slave rebellions. There was a pretty harsh expectation, as in, you kill them as an example kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's your brother. If you're Philemon, what do you do? And the obvious question, the obvious, well, there's three, and the first one nobody really probably thinks. You make him your slave again, in just the same way, and
Mm-hmm.
you go on. You release him because he's your brother, but that has implications. And or you send him back to Paul, right? Because Paul said, "I got use for him." What's wrong with that question?
Mm.
It's assuming that it's Philemon's decision.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote on my paper, uh, I'd ask Onesimus. He's my brother.
Mm-hmm.
But what we get so locked into, there's one right way to do it. What's the answer? And
Yeah.
it's my decision to make. We want things a certain way, but we throw it up to the elders and say, make the decision I'm hoping that I think you should make, and I'm not going to like it if you don't, rather than somehow in community make those decisions, even uh, if I might not have decided that for myself.
Yeah.
Why can't Onesimus decide whether he wants to come live in this household or return to Paul? That's how you would treat a brother,
Mm-hmm.
not decide for him.
Yeah.
And that has uh, lots of implications.
Your perspective, Tim, is always just radically gracious. Like that's a your the operating assumption in the way that you break that down just says, well, why shouldn't brotherhood in Christ overwhelm, undercut, dissolve all of the other cultural and situational assumptions at work, right? Why isn't that the thing that wins at the end of the day? Why isn't that? And that way of thinking,
And why do we always think our way is always the best way? I want to leave room for things greater than what I think.
yeah,
And collectively, we often get there. Not always. Sometimes we can go the opposite direction with collective thinking based on the biases there. But uh, oftentimes, we close ourselves from opportunities that we wouldn't have experienced.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. We work so hard to make it look like we expect it.
So youth group consisted of when I was at Shiloh with you. It consisted of the regular church meetings, you know, twice on Sunday and Wednesday, and then any time but the summer because the summer was so full. Thursday night meetings that were just the youth group in someone's home, which sparked my imagination for house church before I even knew that such a thing existed, and then beyond that, often serving in ways together in Tyler, whether that's soup kitchen or Habitat for Humanity or some other kind of thing, and then beyond that, our very sort of full summer schedule, which thinking about doing that for 22 years is pretty wild, but being gone virtually every week of the summer, driving to Colorado, driving to Mexico, driving to camps, driving and just busing kids all over the place for these really intense sort of moments, right? Literal mountaintop moments. You know, it's like it's not just a figure of speech. It's like this is actually what we do. We go have mountaintop moments that are incredibly high pressure. It's like the environment's like a pressure cooker for young spirituality or old whatever. But um, so did you sort of cobble that together over time, or did you know already like these are the kinds of things that we need to do to get to where the youth group was when I graduated, which was just vibrant. I mean, it was to the extent that like it becomes magnetic for our friends at school that go to other churches. They start showing up and hanging out with our youth group, and proportionate to the size of the church, the youth group numbers start. You get to go like, what is going on here? There's momentum, there's energy, and I know that ebbs and flows. Listen,
Yeah.
I know how youth ministry works, and that ebbs and flows. But did you I don't know, what was that? What was the path of building that like?
Uh, Several different strings. The whole Thursday night thing came out of my experience as a teenager.
Hmm.
Uh, we got our very first youth minister, and that's one of the things he did, and that was impactful to me.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to carry that forward. That's not something the church had been doing, and when I started first arrived and started doing that, I'd have a couple of kids show up, you know,
Right. Right.
but I just kept doing it. Sometimes it's just persistence. Give
Yeah.
people time to come along and imagine what it could be. We call that Thursday night fish, and I never defined what it meant, but people came up with what FISH stood for and two or three leading candidates, and I never affirmed which one it was because I just kind of liked that.
Yeah.
Um, but we,
The Rorschach test of the name.
yeah, it told you a lot about a person. But then, like Wilderness Trek, as I was in my first ministry job, I became aware of it, and I said, "Man, what kind of potential does that have?" And
Yeah.
let's go, right? And so we added that, and of course, mission trips were also important to me as a high schooler, and so that was going to be a given. And I actually
Mm.
moved to this church, and they were already going to Mexico. They had been one time, and some of the teens came to me and said, I don't know what you're doing, but we have to go back to Mexico. And I'm like,
Okay.
okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And it became a critical part of what we're doing. And
Hmm.
my approach too was there were some things that they were doing that I didn't just quit. Um, I did all the things the previous guy had been doing. Some of those, though, however, faded because I didn't think they fit what we were trying to do.
Hmm.
But like the mission trips to Mexico, just they continued. So
Hmm.
you keep what's useful and you give it time. The other thing's time to die a natural death and bring in new things. And I always wanted to have a variety of things in the summer, even though that impacted maybe what I was doing in the town by being gone so much. But different kids would do different things. They didn't all like or were drawn to the same things. I need a variety of experiences, hopefully, that they would all get at least one,
Right.
right? It was never designed that you got to do all of these, even though there were people who did. So,
Hmm.
uh, one element that you left out that I think is critically important is retreats.
I thought you were going to say LTC, which I was going to come
Well,
to next, but yeah,
yeah,
retreats.
but,
Yeah.
but retreats because the intensity of a weekend, they're just things you could do there over
Yeah.
that span that you couldn't do otherwise. And in fact, 3 or 4 retreats a year are more impactful than weeks and weeks of the the weekly things that we did. I think.
Yeah. And do you think that's because you you by retreating, you're unplugging people from the environment that is vying for their attention and energy and everything, and you get to focus? Is it just that? Is it the
Well,
ability to focus?
I think it's two sides to that. One is, uh, you know, you, you can kind of have your guard up more for an hour. It's harder for an extended time, right?
Ah, wearing them down.
And the other part of it is, usually there's a pretty intense plan for a
Hmm.
retreat because you
Yeah.
have to be ready. You don't just uh, show up and say, "Hey, I wonder what we're going to do today."
See how it goes. Yeah.
Right. So there's usually a very uh, important point that you're trying to create, but then there's also those non-formal times, uh, and then I would use the high schoolers to come and work with the middle schoolers at the middle school retreat. One of my absolutely favorite memories uh, was your group of high
Mm,
schoolers coming to work. Do you know where I'm going with this?
maybe.
And we ended that middle school time. We separated the guys and girls, and we ended in a time of affirmation because middle schoolers don't get a lot of that.
Yeah.
But the high schoolers, as we sat around on a Sunday morning giving affirmation, you all went to sleep because
So
you were
went to sleep.
completely worn out.
That's right. We fell asleep. If
Yeah,
there had been a window, you'd have had to resurrect us. I mean, it
exactly.
was.
It was a Eutychus moment. And but then just to drive the point further home, all the middle school boys were awake, and I told them to be very quiet and leave the room we were in. And then one at a time, I woke up the high schoolers and asked them a question. I said, "Do you know what's going on around you?" And because you'd been asleep and all the people that were there were basically gone, I saved you for last.
Hmm.
Uh, it was a very disorienting moment, and I, that was very enjoyable to me.
Oh, that's perfect. It was disorienting, and that was enjoyable for me.
Well, it's just like, oh, I don't know what you're going to do with it, but this is fun.
Yeah, yeah. No,
So
being disoriented is being disorienting is often pretty good, pretty
yeah,
useful.
yeah, exactly.
Oh man. LTC as
Yeah,
well. So this is Leadership Training for Christ, which is a big convention. I've found as I've been in different parts of the country that people don't understand what this is. They think it's there's another thing called like Bible Bowl or something
yeah,
that has a pretty strong contingency or has in the past or whatever, and they just kind of think of these all as the same thing. But I know from being behind the scenes with you, who continues to this day to be an LTC administrator, even though you're not in youth ministry anymore, you're still plugged into LTC and your dear wife Denise. Both of y'all helping make that happen annually, and so like, give me a sense that you were you there at the beginning of LTC?
yeah.
Were you? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
tell the story of like what is this and how does it come about?
Well, it came out of another organization that was states away, and there were a few guys. I wasn't at the very Genesis. There are a few guys that were traveling hundreds of miles who said we can do this in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, without going into all the background, they decided to start their own organization. And so, just as that was happening, is kind of when I came into it because I had a
Mm-hmm.
friend who was part of that group, and he said, "Hey, you need to do this," and I said, "Okay, I'll go check it out," because I, trusted him, and I saw the potential. And I used to hate it
Mm.
because of way things were ran or uh, maybe where emphasis were that I said, well, that's misplaced. So
Mm-hmm.
used to people would do different events and you would get first, second, or third place, and everybody else would get nothing.
Oh.
And I said, well, that's I'm not a every kid should get a trophy kind of thing, but I am for what's the real value here?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the real value is people work hard on something and they get some feedback.
Mm.
And as kids got older, at least with my groups, they didn't care if they got gold, silver, or bronze. They wanted to know what the judges said.
Mm-hmm.
Did they get our point? What did they like? What they didn't like? And then one of the things we stressed was, yes, tell them what they did right, and always tell them something they can improve.
Mm.
I mean, that's the purpose of feedback, right?
Yep.
You hear two things: keep doing this, do this different, do less of that, and then over time you use that information and grow. That to me, that was the the shift in the culture of that organization that was important. And the old way of first, second, third place, you create animosity between groups because there were some churches that were recognized. They knew how to train,
Yeah.
and but under this model, you could root for your friends because they could get the same thing you got,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it was kind of in Texas it would be the UIL model. Your band goes to state, and then you want to get a one, and every band in state could get a one if they were
Yeah.
performing up to the standard.
Mm.
And so really, some people look at that and say, well, church shouldn't be a competition. Okay, it's really not.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
just a platform. And the most amazing thing to me is that there's a dynamic about going to a hotel and being in a strange room and getting up and presenting it in front of all these strangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be effective in the growth.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening is most of the people in the room are people from your church because they want to support you.
Yeah.
And so it's really not a room full of strangers. It's really your church people in a different spot, and it feels completely different to you in a
Yeah. Yeah.
way
Yeah. Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
We did something,
Yeah.
and to build that confidence. And so to illustrate that, one example that I think supports that idea was we had a kid. We had really strong chorus program. We had some talented adults that uh, would lead the choruses, and that just became a huge thing that people enjoyed. And this young man graduated. He went in, I think it was the Marines. He got stationed in some place in South Carolina, and it was a little church that he was going to, and they needed a song leader. Well, the LTC, one of their events was song leading, but he never did it.
Hmm.
But what he said was, hey, they taught me how to sing. I can do song leading. And he became one of their song leaders. Never having done it before, but that confidence to know I can figure things out. And I have a little bit of skill here,
Mm-hmm.
knowledge that can help me in doing that. Again, back
Mm-hmm.
to it's just the tiny of things sometimes that allows you to take that next step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to me, those were the successes. It didn't matter uh, what people did or didn't do
Yeah.
as far as events.
Yeah. I want to give people a sense of sort of scale what we're talking about here because I'm guessing it's kind of hard to imagine what it is if you haven't seen it, right? So
Yeah.
there's more than one LTC around the country. The one we're talking about is in DFW. So it's at a convention center because you have to have enough space for how many
Well,
participants, how many churches?
well, it wasn't always at a convention center. Sometimes at a very large hotel.
Yeah, yeah, but that has a ballroom that can be
Yeah,
broken into,
yeah,
yeah, all
yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
There's lots of meeting rooms. Uh, so I have a long, going back to 1989 connection to the group,
Mm-hmm.
but at one time we had 6,000 kids coming to three different hotel
Yep. Yep.
sites. Currently, this year we're just at one large hotel in Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
and we have about just short of 2,800 kids coming.
Yeah.
So coming with those kids will be uh, at least that many adults. So
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about 5,000 people at one hotel
Yep.
for the weekend. It's organized chaos. People going
Oh yeah. Yeah.
everywhere, showing up where they need to be.
Right.
It's a great experience, and older generations supporting younger generations, because we always had, like, there'd be a few elders come that didn't have kids, to show the support, and just be there and experience it. It's your adults planning to feed. Sometimes our group would take 100 kids
Yeah.
and their families. We'd have 80 hotel rooms,
Mm-hmm.
and just the logistics of that, and then people stepping in and having places to help and to serve, and just doing that together, and spending 2 days going around supporting our kids.
Mm-hmm.
It just manufactured that in a way that if you just did it at your church building, it wouldn't have the same kind of impact. And so, what I disliked in the beginning, because of some of the ways it was ran and organized, I I don't know if this is a gift. Not everybody would call this a gift, but if I see something has potential, I'll just uh, obnoxiously push for it to get where it could be. Is that fair? I'm using that as some people's estimation of maybe how I would go about that, just because I'm persistent.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm convicted of something,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not usually, I don't think unkind, but uh, some people think disagreeing with them is being unkind. And so if that's true, then I am.
Yeah, sure, sure, sure. You're willing to be disagreeable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
to try to do it as kind as possible. Yeah, and,
sure.
and so again, it's about creating a space to see what God's going to do with that.
Yes, but I'll also say, and I think you agree with this, in my experience, the thing about LTC was not the event itself, which was a blast. It
Hmm.
was the months of work leading up to the competition, if that's the right word for it, the
Yeah, yeah,
event, whatever, right?
sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned a few of the events at this extravaganza. You mentioned choir or chorus. You mentioned puppets. But well, let's break down like more of just so people have an idea of it. I know puppet sounds really weird, guys. I get it if you're not if you're not from a church where that has been. But the essence of it is kids writing a script and
Yeah.
telling a story and creating a set design and being as creative as they can and conveying a message using puppets, which is strange, but it's a thing. Um, so doing all of that takes weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to really work it out so that you can put on the performance of this. Same thing with drama. To mention drama performances, but then it's everything from like reading scripture out loud
Mm.
and like doing the practice of congregational reading where you're making eye contact and you're pacing yourself correctly and so on and so forth, to preaching a sermon, writing a sermon and actually delivering it, to extemporaneous speech where you are just given a prompt and you need to sort of intelligently respond to it and you have a very small amount of time to get ready for it, to, I mean, what else, Tim? What am I leaving out? There's
Song
so many
leading.
events. Song leading.
Another one that's popular with a lot of people, signing for the deaf,
Oh yeah,
where,
yeah.
where uh, there are plenty of stories of people who started doing that at their home church, and they made that, much like you made being a missionary where you were headed. They
Hmm.
saw the potential in reaching a underserved community by learning this language,
Hmm.
like you did Spanish,
Hmm.
and using it to connect with people. And
Yep.
uh, there are hundreds of people, thousands at this point, who have done it, and there's a handful that it became the centerpiece of their life, and so
Yeah.
it's helping people discover those gifts, or just even an interest in seeing the possibilities that
Yeah.
So that's a big one. We do have Bible Bowl and Bible Quiz. There are pre-convention events that you do ahead of time, like essay and poetry and um, video Bible drama, short film. So there's something that our hope is that connects with where a kid's interested and have talents.
Hmm.
PowerPoint's another one. Uh, then we also have events that are called challenge events, and they're not really judged. I call them more like a merit badge.
Hmm.
You have a list of things you're supposed to do. You do the list. You determine by what you do the level of
Merit that you receive. Yeah.
award
Yeah.
or whatever. So that would be things like daily devotion, where for a period of whatever the time is for the level you're going for, you, you read and you develop that habit.
Hmm.
We're not grading you on how well you read the text, but did you?
Yeah.
With the intention of that becoming more of a regular habit, or
Memorization, is that's
yeah,
still one of them? Yeah.
scripture memorization, 100 verses, and not very many out of the 2,800 that are coming this year. We'll probably have 4 or 5 that choose to do that.
Yeah.
But now they have those 100 verses inside of them. When will that come out of them again? Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you kind of choose how serious you are. One year we had 2 girls decide they were going to work together and do the 100 verses,
Hmm.
and it, it it just pays dividends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then there's more of those service challenge, and um, it's just an opportunity for students to find a way for God to touch them,
Hmm.
and things they're drawn to and things they may discover uh, they want to continue.
Yeah. Well, so as you said, that there's sort of there was LTC season at
Yeah.
at church for us growing up, and for those months, is that like a 3 month run
Yeah, we
up
usually
to?
start it in January, and then depending on, it's always on Easter weekend. So, like
Yeah.
this year, Easter's not till April 20th, so it's a little bit bigger window.
Yeah.
Next year, it's the first weekend in April. So that span, I just, some churches may do it different, but we always got going in January and then built it out
Yeah.
till the convention.
Yeah. So we're talking about a 3+ month run of focusing on that, and on Sunday nights, right? That's youth group is focused on doing that stuff, and
Yeah,
then throughout the week doing as far as the group activities are concerned. But it also meant that the core teaching curriculum for the youth group became whatever the text for LTC was that year, and so was sort of interwoven with preparing for Bible quiz, even if you weren't necessarily preparing for Bible quiz. It's not an event you were going to do, but you're still kind of in the process for those who were. And we usually had a pretty big group
yeah,
that would do quiz.
we did.
But explain Bible quiz a little bit, because I'm gonna go somewhere with this. But
Okay.
how would you describe what that means, doing a Bible quiz?
Well, so there's a couple of different styles that we utilize. Bible Bowl, you go and you take a test that's I think it's 200, ends up being 250 questions, multiple choice, and you just give, they read it aloud and you give your answer by using this little cube. But it's all done. Your score counts with the rest of your team, and it's all multiple choice questions. So
Mm,
you
okay.
got, Bible quiz is different, and we did Bible quiz. It's a team event where up to 5 kids, using copies of the text, except for one of the tests, are asked 50 questions per test, and there are 4 sections, whatever we're studying, whether it's Luke or Joshua, Judges, Ruth, it's divided into 4 sections, and you take a test over each section.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you use the text and you prepare the text ahead of time. You're looking for words that are maybe unusual, places, numbers. You can highlight all of those things because the skill is, can you navigate the text? That's what I was trying to teach with that. And to build a confidence, I can find my way around. And ultimately, not that you're going to remember every detail, but if the preacher gets up and says, today I'm going to talk about Eutychus, you go, oh, that's Acts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you already narrowed it down to Acts.
Yeah.
And you may or may not, because the weird thing is certain chapters just stick in your mind.
Yeah.
If you say Eutychus, I go Acts 20.
Yep.
Now, I can't do that for the whole book, everything. There's several things, particularly in Acts, I can do that for. But if you go, man, that was toward the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I've narrowed down where, and of course, maybe Bible Gateway and things delete part of its utility. But I always thought if you could narrow it down to a few chapters, you can flip and find where you need to be.
Yeah. But yeah, there is utility in that even still, but it's more about just the profound familiarity that comes out of that, in the sense of like, I know how to navigate this big thick set of texts that are terribly intimidating if you don't have that kind of familiarity. And so here's the story that I was going to tell, is to exemplify this, because that's kind of where I was going, and you just said the thing that was the gist of my point. Was, having done quiz, I think we did Romans one year, we did Kings one year, we did, I think my first one was First Samuel maybe. Anyway, like, every one that we did in the course of my time in high school youth group gave me a level of familiarity with those books of the Bible that I went on to find as an adult in graduate school that my peers just didn't have.
Yeah.
They simply did not know the text to the extent that I did. And the comical example of this was, as a freshman Bible major, the professor, the New Testament professor that always had the freshman class and kind of ran Bible club and that kind of stuff, invites all the freshmen over to his house, and he cooks some burgers and whatever. And so one of the things that's happening in this setting is he pulls out Bible Trivial Pursuit, right? And so, I mean, anybody that's played Trivial Pursuit knows that there's some pretty, like, in whatever version of it is, it's like, it's not general knowledge stuff. It's
Right.
like, you got to kind of know, right? And so pulls out a card, and the question is, who makes an axe head float? And I go, oh, that's Elisha, 2 Kings 6. And the whole room goes, like, what? Why do you know that? And it's because of LTC. Like, I just knew it had been recent enough that I could have done that with virtually any chapter of Kings.
Right.
I just knew the shape of the book. And
Right.
so, yeah, that was...
And early on, just to put that point out, one of the girls who had done it through high school went to ACU
yeah.
in Bible class, and she came back and she just made a random comment. Really, I mean, she wasn't making a big point of it. She said,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't know how much of the Bible I knew.
Exactly. Yep.
Until, in comparison to other church kids who were coming.
Yep.
And that's the thing about quiz. It's not like memorization of facts.
Nope.
You have no idea how you're incorporating this and the comfortableness uh, that you have. And that's really all I was going for. Are they comfortable with the text and feel like they can open it and navigate? And
Yep.
anything greater, being able to do the Bible trivia, was just a added bonus.
Yep. Profound familiarity, and it is strange to realize how not normal that is
Yes.
among other church kids,
Yeah.
right? Of course, folks that don't grow up in church don't have that. Of course, they don't.
Yeah.
But when you're at Bible college or something,
Yeah.
and you realize that all these other kids have also grown up in church, but they
Mm.
just don't have the same level of familiarity with, again, like the topography of the text, right?
Well,
I don't have phrases memorized. I couldn't quote you a verse. I don't know the verse number, but I know where it is. I kind of know the book as a whole.
right. Well,
You know.
even just knowing if it's old or new,
Right,
right?
right,
And
right.
that's a start. I caught a Jay Leno segment one time, and he had gone out on the street and he was asking people Bible questions. This was long ago. I mean, it came on, and I popped the tape in the VCR. That's how long ago it was,
Uh huh.
and I recorded it, and it was just fascinating. And yes, he called through probably thousands of questions to get the most embarrassing. But I loved he would ask people, how many commandments are they?
Yeah.
And they would say 10, and they would like, yeah, I got a Bible answer right. And then he would follow up and he would say, name one of them. And he got freedom of speech. You know,
Oh yeah.
one lady said, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You know,
Commandment number one: you shall not do anything.
right. And so if we're going to be church people, we got to do better than that.
Sure.
Right. And
Sure.
just raising that awareness, I thought was part of my responsibility.
Yes. Okay. So, and we can kind of come full circle here to the the point about intentionality. So it's a different kind of intentionality to pour so much of yourself into building and sustaining a system designed for formation. Very different than the sort of personal one-on-one and small group kinds of stuff that I was talking about earlier, but it's more of the same. Like, okay, so here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and then we build something on purpose and evolve it over the years and stay nimble and make sure that it's adaptable and learns its lessons and all of that kind of stuff in order to to prepare students to, I mean, what did you just say? If we're going to be church people in the most meaningful,
Yeah.
important sense,
Yeah.
to be church people, right? How do you prepare students to be church people with that level of intentionality? And I look at LTC and I think, it's not for everybody. Not everybody loves it. Plenty of people hate that it's on Easter weekend,
Yeah.
but man, I just can't argue with the results. And so I've always been very grateful for those experiences. They've been important.
There was a time, I think part of it was demographics, it's a specific families that were our church. There was, there was a lot of energy, a lot of vitality over time, and a lot of it was some shifts in who was coming to our church, how many youth group families we had at the church, because the church has a lifespan,
Yeah.
where I was having less kids. And when that's portrayed as a hallmark of a church, that's not a good look, right? Because church is about attraction. Uh, but
That was tongue in cheek, everyone.
the ironic thing was, I think, in my estimation, as fun and as good as those big times were,
Right.
I was doing some of my best work with the group of kids I had because I looked at them and said, where else in the world would this group of people be connected together? Because they were so divergent and so in many places and just so different from each other. But we still had a community, but it wasn't recognized in that way because
Mm-hmm.
numbers were diminished.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that contributed to uh, my exit from youth ministry.
Right.
And what is it going to take for us to get past the cultural markers
Mm.
and truly look at and be able to have the aptitude as church leadership to see something else going on? And I get it, it's difficult to do when we're bombarded with other views of how you determine, and then you have all kinds of theological perspectives that inhabit that as well, and it's just messy.
But then think of what happens if more church people are trained in a culture that A, finds joy in the little moments,
Mm,
and B, is comfortable with things not going the way we thought they were supposed to
mm,
go.
mm-hmm,
I mean, that's it. That's
mm-hmm,
it is a different reality. It's a different possibility, and it continues to, in my better moments, invigorate my
mm.
imagination and instill hope.
But yes, I think imagination's a great word. And the other one I would put with that is conversation, just what you're doing here and continue to do. Uh, it's there are so many times at what I would consider unfortunate moments when collectively we've been afraid of the conversation because
Mm-hmm.
we want to control the outcome or the picture of the outcome so strongly that we don't have confidence maybe to reach the same conclusion, but to do it with the integrity of including everybody in that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what you think about Paul and Barnabas' split,
Mm-hmm.
whether there was what kind of tension inhabited that.
Right.
But I like to imagine they had very real conversations and they go, this makes sense that we double our efforts in a way.
Mm-hmm.
What's the outcome uh, of not being in the same place?
Mm-hmm.
There's benefit to that. Uh, does it have to be a split?
Right.
Could a church just decide based on who they were and who was there? Uh, we really have two different church cultures here. And
Mm-hmm.
can we, in kindness and grace, pull gently apart and still support each other and
Mm-hmm.
still be brothers and still have the opportunity to be comfortable with where we're at the moment as we see what life as a church should look like?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's happened, but I don't see very many examples
Right.
of that. It's rather than a gentle separation, it's a breaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah. But
sundering.
can we still imagine that as a possibility?
Yeah. That's the question. How How theologically formed are our imaginations?
Mm. Yeah.
I think that there's, and of course, it depends on which theology, but there's a sense in which our imaginations just so often remain untouched by theology that we otherwise would espouse.
Hmm.
And so when it comes down to it, it's a brass tacks kind of a thing. We actually just can't imagine it. We just can't imagine a community functioning in that way, or conversation and disagreement functioning in that way. The use of our time and resources functioning in that way. We just can't imagine it. Honestly, we can say it, but we can't imagine it. And so, yeah, that's no small part of what led me down the road of theology as such.
Mm.
I'm just trying to figure out and understand the system, right? What is actually happening here
Mm.
in churches
Yeah.
where there's such a huge disjunction between what we might confess and then what we live. And anyway, it's just one of those questions that I've kept hammering on.
Yeah.
Well, do you have a final story? I mean, we've gone over 2 hours, which congratulations, and to no surprise, it's my longest episode. So, but we have talked for hours upon hours so many times that I'm not even feeling this.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just what we do.
do you think there's still people with us?
One or two. I bet my wife will finish the episode. Probably. She'll complain, but she'll finish it.
Thank you, Megan.
Uh-huh.
Uh, uh, well, I'm trying to think of a good Greg story to
Uh-oh.
tell. Yeah. Um, and there's several. Uh, would you rather have the lost backpack in Mexico, or right? You with me?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Or uh, the lost intern in Peru,
Um oh boy.
or
Yeah.
something else. Um,
So there's a theme emerging. Why am I losing stuff so much? No, yeah, so I'm tell your version of the lost backpack. What's the
okay. So we're in Mexico. I take a lot of cash because credit card doesn't work very well with the international, at least at that time.
Mhm.
It's $10,000 because this is a men's trip. Greg and Kyle, his partner from Peru, are back home on what do you call it when a missionary comes
Furlough. Yeah.
furlough for a short time. They both go on this trip, and I have this backpack, and I'm going in to check into the hotel, and I purposefully leave the uh, the backpack on the van because I know that, and I haven't told everybody, it has $10,000 and my MacBook Pro laptop in it, and I want it to be secure. And because Greg and Kyle are helpful, they they bring the backpack in and they set it down 2 feet from me. And I didn't realize this. And I'm trying to get us checked into the hotel, and uh, I'm about to go out and get the backpack, and Greg and Kyle say, "Well, we brought it in." And I looked around, and I'm like, "Where is it?" And you get that sinking feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and your first hope, your maybe only hope, is somebody has accidentally picked it up and taken to the room. But we check with everybody; they have not, and that really just leaves a horrible conclusion in that it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this little hotel did have video cameras, and they played it back. And uh, there's video of a Gentleman walking in, he picks up a couple bags. He picked up Greg's first with a MacBook sticking out of it. Why didn't he take that one? Because that was an old computer
Yeah.
and no cash. But he puts it back down. He walks over to mine, which is completely zippered. He doesn't really know what's in it. And then he picks it up. And as Greg and Kyle are coming back in from the van, he walks past them with my backpack.
Mm-hmm.
And he's gone. We have no hope of getting it over, but there was just that sinking feeling. And I was able to use the credit card, but there's certain things you got to pay with cash. And nobody liked this, but one of the guys that most people wouldn't have necessarily considered that spiritual, right?
Yeah.
He's a great guy, but he just walked over to me and said, "It's only money."
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, I was like, "Okay, we're good."
Yeah.
And then the amazing thing was, without asking, people just started coming and saying, "I got a 20 extra," or "I got 100 extra." And by the end of the trip, people had just volunteered the cash, and it took care of all the things we had to pay for in cash. And we put the hotel on the credit card, even though it cost,
Mm-hmm.
we were fine. In fact, it was an opportunity. And then the thing that started happening was to imagine what that cash did to the person who discovered it. What happened?
Yeah.
Did it? It may have done nothing.
Yeah.
But it was fun to imagine that God took that and transformed somebody and transformed their life in a way that we will never know.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's the thing about imagining that way, is there are possibilities other than the bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little story. And plus,
Yeah, I
it's
love
fun
that.
just to say I made a mistake one time, and they imagine all kinds of things you're about to say, but it's not that you lost $10,000.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty big ticket. Um, that was, I mean, to be fair, you're sort of softening it. It was me. I brought that bag in because I was sitting in the shot, riding shotgun and in the van with you, and it was sitting between our two seats,
Yeah.
and everybody started unloading the trailer and bringing all their luggage in, and I was like, well, if I'm gonna go inside, I'm not leaving Tim's computer, which I didn't know there was cash in there. I'm not leaving Tim's computer in the van where somebody could snag it. So,
I'm going to make
so
it
I'm
more
gonna
convenient for them.
make it way more convenient. So I brought it in and set it next to you,
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
here is a safe place for this bag.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was a very interesting thing to watch that video back, because there was actually a team of people. There was three people that were casing that thing
Mm-hmm.
and operating in conjunction. And then you see him do this, lifting the bag and sort of feeling different ones to see which one he's going to snag. And somehow he's doing this, and none of the 30 gringos in the lobby are noticing, right? And I've gone back out to help bring bags in. And so by the time I come back, you're like, where's the bag? And I'm like, what do you mean, where's the bag? The bag's right. I put it right here. How could it be anywhere else? It's supposed to be right here. So once we come to the conclusion and we see the video, and this is actually a
Mm-hmm.
group that they've seen casing before, and it's like, okay, what? Anyway, this is a weird scenario. They just got really lucky and grabbed a bag with an entire band in it, and and
Mm-hmm.
I am devastated. Like, I am absolutely distraught, because especially at that time in my life, the thought of $10,000 and the thought that, like, we're not going to be able to do the work that we came down here to do, I was just terribly upset. And that comment, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just money, was very liberating,
Mm-hmm.
right? It
Yeah,
was it there you get set free by the attitude where and then the entire room of men, they, they're not angry, they're not upset, they're not distraught. Everybody's just like, all right, so now we're gonna do the thing we came here to do.
yeah.
And it's just like, oh, okay. I'm way too spun up about, I mean, it's not nothing, it's important. And it's,
Mhm.
money that was donated
Yeah.
by Christians who cared to see this work happen. And it's, but yeah, it's the perspective, just being in a community with someone else who's able to go actually look at it a different way,
Mhm.
just see it a different way.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, I needed that. I absolutely needed somebody else to see it rightly.
Well, that's
I
the
love that.
power of community, right?
Yeah,
When you can't see it, maybe I can, and when I can't see it, you can help me see it, and
yeah,
that's why that's the essence of church. On
yeah,
those days that we're totally overwhelmed uh, by life, somebody else can be there with us, and that's how we come to experience the presence of God in a way that is undeniable.
absolutely. Well, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time. These, we've had so many conversations and we'll continue to have so many conversations that
Mm-hmm.
it's a little weird to put a camera on it, but at the same time, it's like magic for me. I mean, I just, I'm just happy to get to share a little bit of that with others, and I'm grateful that you're willing to do it.
Absolutely. It's been a blessing to me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Proud of you.
We'll talk soon.
Love
Thank you.
you.
Love you too.